Have you ever wondered about the life of the deadliest dentist in the Wild West? The man known as Doc Holliday was more than just a gunslinger and gambler. He was a skilled dentist and a legendary figure in American history. Before we begin this incredible tale of the deadliest dentist in the Wild West, I want to encourage you to hit that like button and subscribe to stay up to date with our future content. Let's begin. The sun was setting over the sprawling fields of Georgia, casting a warm glow over the small town of Griffin. In a modest home on the outskirts of town, a baby boy was born. His parents, Alice and Henry Holliday, named him John Henry, but he would later become known by a different name, Doc Holliday. From a young age, Doc showed a keen intellect and a love of reading. His father, a wealthy planter, encouraged his son's studies and hoped he would become a lawyer or doctor. But Doc had other ideas. As he grew older, he became increasingly rebellious and prone to troublemaking. When Doc was just 15, tragedy struck. His father died, leaving the family with a substantial debt. Doc was sent to live with his uncle in Valdosta, Georgia, and attend school. But the young man chafed under the strict discipline of his uncle's household. He longed for adventure and excitement. One day, he stumbled upon a group of men playing cards. Intrigued, he asked if he could join in. It didn't take long for him to realize he had a natural talent for the game. He began playing more and more, eventually dropping out of school to travel the South and make a living as a professional gambler. It wasn't long before Doc's reputation as a skilled card player began to spread. He became known for his sharp mind and his ability to outwit even the most experienced gamblers. But his reckless nature sometimes got him into trouble, and he found himself on the wrong side of the law more than once. Despite the danger, Doc was addicted to the thrill of the game. He continued to gamble and travel, never staying in one place for too long. He was always looking for the next big score, the next big challenge. As he entered adulthood, Doc realized that he needed a more stable source of income. He decided to pursue a career in dentistry and enrolled in the Pennsylvania College of Dental Surgery. It was there that he earned the nickname Doc, which would stick with him for the rest of his life. But even as he pursued his studies, Doc continued to gamble and get into trouble. He was a man of contradictions, intelligent and educated, yet prone to violence and recklessness. Little did anyone know, Doc's life was just beginning. The deadly dentist was about to become one of the most infamous figures of the Wild West. After completing his studies, Doc Holliday returned to Georgia to begin his career as a dentist. He opened his own practice in Atlanta and quickly became known for his skillful and painless extractions. But the quiet life of a dentist was not enough for Doc. He missed the excitement of the gambling world, and he found himself drawn back into it. One night, after a particularly successful card game, Doc found himself in a heated argument with a local lawman. The argument turned physical, and Doc, always quick to defend his honor, pulled out a knife and stabbed the man. The lawman survived, but Doc knew he had to leave town. He sold his dental practice and set out on the road once again, this time with a reputation as a dangerous man. Doc made his way to Texas, where he continued to gamble and get into trouble. He became embroiled in a feud with another local lawman, and the situation escalated until the two men had a showdown in the street. Doc emerged victorious, but he knew he could not stay in Texas any longer. He fled to New Mexico, where he began to make a name for himself as a gunslinger. It was in New Mexico that Doc met Wyatt Earp, a lawman and gambler who would become his lifelong friend and partner in crime. The two men hit it off immediately, bonding over their love of gambling and their shared disdain for authority. Together, they traveled to Dodge City, Kansas, where Wyatt had been appointed deputy marshal. Doc quickly made a name for himself in the rowdy town, drinking and gambling his way through the saloons and brothels, but trouble followed him wherever he went. One night, after a particularly wild party, Doc got into a fight with a local businessman. The fight turned deadly, and Doc shot and killed the man. He was arrested and put on trial, but he was eventually acquitted on the grounds of self-defense. Despite the close call, Doc continued to live life on his own terms. He and Wyatt moved on to Tombstone, Arizona, where they became embroiled in the infamous gunfight at the Oak Corral. Doc and the Earp brothers faced off against a gang of outlaws, and Doc killed two men in the fight. The gunfight made Doc a legend, but it also made him a target. As Doc's reputation as a deadly gunslinger grew, so did the danger. But he refused to back down. He was addicted to the thrill of the game, the rush of adrenaline that came with every showdown. The deadliest dentist was just getting started. Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp's reputation continued to grow as they roamed from town to town, gambling and getting into trouble. But their luck began to run out in 1881, when they became embroiled in a bitter feud with a gang of outlaws known as the Cowboys. The Cowboys were a ruthless gang of rustlers, thieves and killers who operated along the Arizona-Mexico border. They had long been a thorn in the side of the law, and Wyatt Earp had been tasked with bringing them to justice. The feud came to a head on October 26, 1881, in the town of Tombstone. The Cowboys had threatened the Earp brothers and Wyatt, Doc, and their allies were determined to put an end to their reign of terror. They confronted the Cowboys in a vacant lot near the Oak Corral, and a fierce gunfight broke out. In the chaos, Doc Holliday showed his true colors as a deadly gunslinger. He fired his revolver with deadly accuracy, killing 3 of the Cowboys and wounding several others. The gunfight lasted less than a minute, but it would go down in history as one of the most famous shootouts in the Wild West. Despite their victory, the feud with the Cowboys was far from over. The outlaws retaliated by ambushing and killing one of Wyatt's brothers, and the situation quickly spiraled out of control. Doc and Wyatt became targets, and they were forced to flee Tombstone and go into hiding. For the next several years, Doc and Wyatt lived as outlaws, constantly on the move and always looking over their shoulders. They traveled to Colorado, New Mexico, and even as far as Alaska, always staying one step ahead of the law. But even as he lived life on the run, Doc's health began to deteriorate. He had contracted tuberculosis, a deadly disease that would eventually claim his life. Despite his illness, he continued to gamble and get into trouble, living every day as if it were his last. As the years went by, Doc's legend only grew. He became known as the deadliest dentist in the West, a man feared by outlaws and respected by lawmen. His reputation as a skilled gunslinger and card player would be remembered long after his death. By the late 1880s, Doc Holliday's health had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer live as an outlaw. He knew that his time was running out, and he decided to return to his family in Georgia to spend his final days. Doc arrived in Griffin, Georgia in the fall of 1887. He was a shadow of his former self, weak and frail from years of hard living and tuberculosis. But even in his weakened state, he refused to give up his love of gambling. He spent his final days playing poker with old friends and acquaintances, often winning large sums of money despite his failing health. He knew that he didn't have much time left, and he wanted to make the most of it. As his condition worsened, Doc was confined to bed, unable to even sit up without assistance. But even then, he continued to play cards, propped up by pillows and surrounded by friends. On November 8, 1887, Doc Holliday passed away at the age of 36. He was buried in the family plot in Griffin, Georgia, next to his father. Despite his short and tumultuous life, Doc Holliday had left his mark on the Wild West. He had been a skilled dentist, a deadly gunslinger, and a legendary gambler. He had lived life on his own terms, always true to himself and his principles. In death, Doc became a symbol of the Wild West, a larger-than-life figure whose exploits and legend would live on for generations to come. He had lived fast and died young, but he had left a legacy that would never be forgotten. The deadliest dentist had finally met his end, but his spirit would live on in the pages of history. I hope you enjoyed this incredible story of the Wild West's deadliest dentist, Doc Holliday. If you found it as fascinating as I did, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Thank you for watching.